That's probably what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about is how important that client worksheet is and how you can use it. We call it the suitability worksheet because that's how we figure out what carrier to match them with, right? So it's the same principle. We figured that sometimes if you say suitability sheet, it sounds kind of like fancy.
Yeah,
Makes me feel good.
fancy.
And it makes me feel like I can say a big word, so I like to use it when I can. I never miss an appointment without having it. And so the reason that basically Zach Twardowski did a great job. And he said, listen, I understand all the questions on the form. It just helps me maintain that structural piece that you were talking about, right? That way you can't get lost if you're a new agent in a home because you have the sheet that tells you, okay, so today, Bob and Mary, we're going to go through age, income, house, health, current insurance, and then I'm going to figure out where to place you. Probably, Tiffany, what I get the most questions about and what I really wanted to talk about is how to find premium in a home. And then once you find that premium, how do you actually get into a spot where you can close the appointment? And I think that that's where we get a bunch of misses with new agents because they don't understand that our job is to go in there and stand up for the family, and that's okay to do because you're only doing it to put them in a better spot. Because if they spend all this time walking you through how horrendous the situation is going to be for their family if they don't have it, and then they want to take 2 days, 5 weeks, X amount of invisible time, all they're doing is keeping themselves at risk. And so our job is to make sure that we go in there and we do a good enough job going through this inventory sheet that we find something that they match with. That's going to be, I always phrase it as kind of whatever the bare minimum amount that you guys are going to want to have in place that you think is enough for Mary. That's the best way I think that I could phrase it. So it's like, hey, this is not designed to be where you're overspending on insurance. We're just trying to find the bare minimum. Like if you're gone tomorrow, what's the minimum amount she's going to need to have in place that fits you guys universally in your budget year round? Because to your point, that's the big thing. It doesn't do anybody any good if it's a great concept, but they overspend for 2, 3, 4 months, and then they get into a tight spot, and they still need the insurance, but it was too much. And some of that is when you start going through these inventory sheets and building a really strong why with a client, they do sometimes try to over purchase policies that they can't afford. And that's just because you did a great job building the why so much that they're like, I would do anything to have this much in place for my spouse because I love her that much or I love him that much or whatever the situation is, that they'll say, I can do the one for $560 a month, and that's not realistic sustainably long term. So I think the main things that I wanted to really go through thoroughly is bring that client suitability worksheet in there. When you're setting the structure of your appointments, you're going to bring in your license, identify yourself, talk about, my family. I like to bring into every single appointment. I'm going to do the same exact thing for you guys as I would do for my own parents because I want to be present in the house, and I would never want to put them in a product or a situation financially that I wouldn't do for my own family. And I think if you can communicate that and show true empathy in the house, I literally am here to help you guys, and I will do whatever it takes to get you approved for as much as you guys can afford. That's the minimum you think they're going to need when you're not here.
Do you think, Easton, I 1,000,000% agree, and I love that. And I think, do you find that when new agents are in the home that they're worried a little bit about the suitability worksheet, and they forget that or they miss that? How do you teach agents to put that in when it comes to in-home, being, empathetic and compassionate and caring? How do you help them?
So I like to walk them through hey, when you go into the house, all you're trying to do is establish some kind of why first. So when you get in there, and Eric Schmidt talks about it nonstop. And that's Zach and I kind of took that from a lot of his trainings where, you go in there and you establish why are you in the house in the first place? You bring your license, so that's what you have in hand, and maybe the lead sheet depending on the lead type. And then you're just sitting down, hey, Easton, this is my state ID. Just want to make sure I'm legally allowed to do this with you guys. I am here to help. When you guys initially had filled out this sheet, Tiffany, was there anything specific that prompted you to start looking for life insurance of any kind? Or if it's a mortgage protection form, as an example, hey, when you guys were reading through this and about, sick, disabled, die, was it primarily for you, Bob, or you, Mary, or, a little bit for each of you? Is it about a 50-50 income split? And just a calm, casual conversation, trying to get some kind of direction to go. And then it's just about pouring compassion into them. And I think if what we really try to communicate with them is this is not a big rush process. It doesn't have to be 28 minutes and you're in and out. If you need to take more time and you're having an appointment that they're asking you a bunch of questions, there's a huge why in the house, it doesn't have to be a rush, right? Because we are in there to help them, and it's because we care about them. And if you take a little extra time, at the beginning, understanding the situation, figuring out who it's for, what's going to happen without it. Like, just have a conversation like you would your own family. Once I learned how to do that, a lot of stuff started to change for me, because I could say, hey, listen, if when I was 6 years old, if my father would have not came home from work and my mom was staying at home to raise 3 little hellions, like, what does that look like for my mom having to go back to work, putting us into daycare, losing my dad's income? It's a paycheck gone for life. Like, that's very impactful.
We'll repeat that.
It's a paycheck gone for life.
That's huge.
And I will say that in every single house, because if you make $3,000 a month, that's $36,000 a year. It's $360,000 lost in a decade, right? So that compounds on it. So that's a lot of money lost. It's irreplaceable. They're never going to get that back. So is $100,000 an all-purpose problem solver? It isn't all the time, but $100,000 is significantly more than zero, which is what you currently have. Or you've got $100,000 as your work income replacement. Like, so you have that $100,000, which is not going to get you. So if you make $36,000 a year, that's like 3 years of income. When that runs out, what's the next process? What's the next step? So now you've got the 3 years of income placement from his work policy. Can you guys walk me through what the game plan is after that? And then I just kind of let him pour into me on, well, we didn't really think about what happens when that runs out. Like, I'm assuming that you guys filled this out so that you could try to take the house off the table to extend that income replacement that you guys already have in place. I'm assuming that that's why I'm here.
So, and it's such good stuff, because building, like, we have to paint pictures. And by asking, you overwork objection immediately. Like, there's no, your work policy, that's great. That's about 3 years. Let's talk about what your plan is after that. That's huge, because that's the reality. That's what insurance is for. It's not to protect immediately the day after someone passes. It's for the future. It's for what happens after that. You had said a couple of closing scenarios that if you would go, because they were so good, if you will go over the I need to think about it, so you did a couple of those, and then how you break that down by not sacrificing the integrity of the products or the integrity of the need to be there, but getting people into something that they can do right now.
So the first part is trying to get in front of as many objections as you can. And if you do a good enough job up front in the appointment where you go through their why, which is what we talked about, which is crazy important, go through a soft budget with them. Hey, outside of the house, you guys pretty debt-free. Nobody will ever be more excited to talk about themselves being debt-free than our clients, because it's exciting to talk about not having any debts. Mm-hmm. So no other major debts or bills outside of the house, fair enough. No other multiple six-figure type stuff. Nope, nothing. We're literally debt-free. We have X amount left on the house, and that is it, right? So now I know that we've got a house payment, and all the rest of the income outside of utilities and food and family stuff, I will build in extra income that they can use for whatever they want. So, like, if they make $5,000 a month, the mortgage payment's $1,300. I'll say, okay, let's add another $1,500 into this, right? So now you're going to have utilities covered, food for the whole family, and then if an emergency comes up, you guys have another additional $1,000 available that you still have. So we probably have like $1,500 to work with as far as like the insurance budget goes. I'm not trying to sell anything, but I'm trying to figure out what do they have left after all their necessities, build in a cushion, and then add in fun money. So I'm building stuff into their budget constantly so that I'll never show them something that they can't afford, because we've already established that they really have like $3,500 left over, but I gave them $2,500 of extra income to play with in case an emergency comes up or they want to do something with their family. They still have it, and their insurance isn't going to get messed with. And then all I do from there is, once I have that established, I'll say something small like, well, the good news right here is you guys actually don't qualify for anything out of your budget because your debt to income is too strong, which now it gives me permission to build kind of as big as of an insurance policy as I need to, where I can maximize their age and health and get them as much insurance as they could technically qualify for, and that's affordable. But I let them know that they get to design it. This is not put together for you guys to overspend on under any circumstance. I'm just saying you guys could build it to be literally however much you want. If you want to spend $50 or $1,000 a month, it's all expendable in your income. You could utilize this tool however you guys want to create that tax-free payout for your spouse. And that's kind of how I set the initial stage when I go through the why, establish what the income is, and start kind of going through how much expendable income do they have. And then I'll figure out, do you guys pay extra on the home, or what are you guys setting aside in an emergency fund? So if something does happen, you guys have been, kind of trying to rat hole $500, $600, $700 a month, because the biggest emergency in life is death. So there'll never be a bigger emergency than that. So if I can establish, hey, for our emergencies, we've been putting 500 here, we've been adding 200 to the house, I've already got 700, like immediately that I can play with. So I'll say, hey, instead of using, like technically you guys got 700, why don't we start with something smaller, which will give you a good chunk of insurance, $200, $300, $400, $500. That way it doesn't, eat up all of your emergency fund stuff. And now we have $200 to $500 that we can leverage against the insurance company's money because we're trying to use as much of their money as we can and as little of the clients. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I think that the same goes for a final expense appointment. When you sit down, like Easton was just explaining how you work through someone's budget by asking good questions. Give them some cushion. Find out what they have left over every month. Now, everyone's going to tell you they have no money left over every month because they don't want to spend any money. So by asking good questions and building their why, especially like final expense appointments too, it's the same process, guys. It's exactly the same thing. The difference may be you're working with maybe more of a fixed budget. But fixed budgets, I just sat with a client the other day and she had $718 was her benefit that she got every month. And she wanted to spend $55 a month. There just was no way her budget could afford it. And so I said, look, here's the only way any of us get hurt right now. And that's if you and I agree to a payment I know that's uncomfortable for you, is uncomfortable for you. You put in 3 months into this. And then you call because you can't afford it. Now your family's unprotected. I didn't do my job and it hurts my family. So let's agree to put something into place that makes sense that you can pay now, tomorrow, and every month for the rest of your life. Because I want to make sure that Jennifer, your daughter, is the person I bring a check to. And it's exactly what you just said. Same thing.
And that's the powerful part. And if they can feel how much and how important it is to you that they do not overspend because it has to be in place the day before you're gone. Because if it's not, then it doesn't do anybody any good. And that's the whole reason we're here, is to protect X person. So I think if you get in front of most of that stuff, by the time that you get to the scenario where it's like, hey, I really need to think about this, my probably something that I picked up on an old FFL training for several years ago, as Haroon was on there talking about, like, hey, just ask them if this was $1 a day, do you think you guys would feel a lot more comfortable moving forward with the plan? Say, of course we would. Okay, got it. So it's probably less that you guys need extra additional time to think about it and what it's going to be, but it's just a slightly out of budget. So that's really easy to fix. I can fix that part. So what we'll do is we'll just start a little bit smaller because, again, I need you to have this forever. So why don't we just decrease this a little bit? And you're not always trying to decrease right away because you want to make sure that you're providing enough value. But what they could just have the money, but they don't want to spend that much, and that's okay. We just got to figure out where it is on their priority list. But if you can take that where it's this time concept off the table and it's really they don't want to pay that much, so you can adjust that part. It's the same thing if they've been on a fixed or retirement income for a decade and they're going to mull over the budget, or really I got to go and crunch some numbers. Bob, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been retired now? 10 years. Got it. So fair enough to say that you've kind of got to the penny of what's coming in and going out every month for the last decade. Yep, I know every penny. Okay, so Bob, why don't we do this? Why don't we figure out where you're going to be a little bit more comfortable to start? Because I know this is important to you. Because you said she doesn't have 15, 20, 30 grand laying around overnight in a final expense situation. So do we need to do like 12 and a half, or do we want to just start at 15? Because we did establish that technically any of this is okay mathematically. I just want to make sure you're comfortable with the minimum that we need to leave behind for Mary. And that's what it always comes back down to, right? They know the budget. They don't need time. You just need to make sure that you're taking that off the table and figuring out what is really the problem. How can I really help you? And I think that's the big stuff that you can kind of navigate through, is taking the pretend objection off the table, because it always comes down to, I just don't want to pay that much, or I'm like nervous that I'm going to make a bad decision. So I let them know that they do have time. Hey, once you guys apply, get approved, they mail you your stuff, just call me. I'll come back and go through all this with you. If you want to leave as is, great. If you guys do want to do an increase at that time, I can help you with that part too. But we need to figure out the minimum that you guys need to have in place if tomorrow's it. And that's kind of how I go through that part.
Exactly. Well, hopefully this was really, I enjoyed it so much, Easton. It is nice when we get to, meet people and then you're like, okay, this is awesome. We learned so much from each other. Thank you so much to Sean for having us on the Next Level call, and make it a great week.